Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. 2 years ago to the day, I had the very great fortune to interview my next guest on the release of her debut novel, The One, a story that took us behind the scenes of a popular reality dating show and the lengths someone will go to find their one true love. This year, she's back with another fabulous novel, a beautiful and moving story about friendship, love and loss that I know many of you will absolutely adore. The novel is called All We Have Is Now, released by Harlequin, and I'm so happy to be welcoming Kaneana May back to the podcast today. Hi, Kaneana.
Hi, Claudine. Thank you so much for having me. And I can't believe that it's 2 years to the day. That's kind of serendipitous or something, isn't it?
I couldn't agree with you more. Now, it's absolutely wonderful for me to be chatting with you again on the release of your second novel. Congratulations on All We Have Is Now. I thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. So tell me, what kind of feedback are you getting about the novel so far?
Oh, Claudine, I've had such lovely feedback about this book. I've had a lot more messages, I must say, much more personal messages with this story than I did with my debut. And I think it is because a lot of the issues within the story people have personally experienced themselves. So they want to reach out and they want to say that they, connected to the story and they connected to the characters and they want to tell me about an experience that they've been through themselves. And that's just one of the most amazing feelings. It's been really lovely.
I can imagine it would be beautiful. Now, I felt that this book had a different tone than your first. In many ways, it was a more serious book that touched, as you say, on some serious themes. So I wanted to ask you, was it always your intention to write something like this, or was it more about the way the story unfolded for you?
Yes, it's funny. I didn't set out to write a different book at all. It was more about the story evolving. I knew quite early on the seed of the story began, but kind of first started when a friend or a series of friends actually suffered some all-encompassing losses, and each of them were heartbroken, and they were all like unexpected and all heart-wrenching, and each time I wanted to ease the pain but always felt a little bit hopeless, and I knew each of their worlds were never going to look the same again. And I think that in everyday life people are faced with different kinds of heartbreak and they feel lonely, and I wanted to write a story to highlight that they were not alone. And I hope that the book explores different ways to manage grief and tries to give hope at the end of a very dark tunnel. So the story has a seed of, an all-encompassing loss, but also at the same time, quite early within my writing process, the idea of a setting came. And so I think it was the marrying of these two places. So I set my story in a wellness centre. So three women have come together to create a business. They all are focusing on health and peace and recovery, and a place to, focus on yourself. And I felt that this was a really lovely juxtaposition. They're all trying to heal others, but how can you heal others if you're broken yourself? So each of the women have their own issues that they're trying to face and deal with, and I take you hopefully on a journey about themselves, but also with their business as well. We have a Pilates instructor and we have a counsellor and a nutritionist as well. So they're all trying to make the best person that you can be, but sometimes it's hard when you've got other things going on as well.
I adored each of the three main characters in this book. There was Elsie and Olive and Bree. Each of these women were bonded by a certain desire to create a healing space in the practice that they set up together, but they were all motivated to do so by different reasons. They couldn't have been more different from one another, is what I wanted to say. So, Kaneana, how did you manage to get into their heads and create such distinct voices for each of them?
Yes, well, I think that's something that I tried really hard to do, because I know that when you're getting feedback about a manuscript, people or readers or the publisher, they don't want to read a book where the voices can't be distinguished between one another. They want to know that these are very separate voices and very separate people. So I did try really hard. I don't know if I can explain it exactly how I did it, but I tried to. Olive was a character that I've written before. She was in a short story that I wrote, and so her voice is very clear in my mind. I know what she's like. She's very particular about things. She likes things done in an ordered way, in a measured way. My sister actually wrote to me after reading a draft of it and said, "Is Olive based about me?" Because I had written a line about Olive not wanting to go outside with her slippers on. And she always takes her slippers off before going outside. And I'm the same. I don't like getting my slippers dirty either. In comparison, Bree, one of the characters, I think Bree would walk through wet grass with her slippers on. And it's just trying to get into the mindset of thinking about what one person would do compared to what other people would do. I mean, I don't even know what Elsie would do with her slippers. She probably doesn't own some. She probably pulls socks on. So it's just trying to get into the mindset of what this person is and who they are. And also I think when you're first setting out to create your characters, I was trying to make sure that they each had different goals, even though I needed them to have the same goal of wanting their business to be a success and wanting their business to provide this wonderful service of peace and recovery, that they each needed different things. And in some ways, each of their own goals needs to rub up against each other, if that makes sense. They needed to kind of offer some abrasions. So Olive's strictness and decisiveness needs to, in some ways, not definitely add direct aversion to what Bree wants, but maybe offer opportunities to rub her the wrong way, or offer a little bit of friction so that you don't necessarily always have drama between them, but there might be a bit of niggling between them, or there might be be able to offer humour in the scene, or so I tried to keep that in mind every time I had them cross, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. But it's so reflective of real life in many ways because, we all have friends that we adore, but there are little things about them that annoy us. I mean, that's just the reality. And as I mentioned in my introduction, this book touched on some raw themes, things that many readers may be able to relate to, things like grief over the loss of a loved one, caring for elderly and sick parents, drug addiction, coping with blended families. These are heavy issues, but having said that, I thought that you managed to weave these issues and themes through the narrative in a seamless and effortless way. So, did you set out to deal with these issues consciously?
Some of the issues were conscious decisions, that I wanted to write stories about certain elements. And then other ones I think just came naturally as the story progressed. I'm part of a step family myself and have always been. So when I decided that Elsie had a stepson, that wasn't me setting out to write the conflict that comes within her story. That actually happened quite naturally, that I could understand the pulls and nuances that are involved with having a relationship like that. And Jonah, who's the stepson, he actually happened to be one of my favorite characters. He was just so innocent and lovely. I found like thinking, well, how can't you fall in love with him? And what he offered to the story was really important in the end. And Olive deals with a parent suffering from Alzheimer's. Now, that was an issue that has always been quite special, important in my heart, because my grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease when I was only about 13, I think. Oh, sorry, no, that's when she passed away. She had it for 5 years. So I was in primary school. So most of my memories of my grandmother are in a nursing home. And in her case, it was quite a sudden loss in my mind. Obviously, as a child, I would have been hidden from a lot of the things. But my mother tells a story that one day her mum, my nana, was walking around the garden with her, and then the next day she couldn't remember how to walk, couldn't get out of bed. So obviously there have been things where she couldn't remember along the way, but I think that always plays in my mind about how devastating that loss is, that the person's still there physically, but they're not the same person inside, or they mentally can't remember things. I mean, it's just heartbreaking to think that sometimes we would go visit her and she didn't know who my mum was, and to not know your own child, like that's just devastating on both accounts. I think of myself now as a mother and think, imagine if that happened, that you wouldn't remember your own children. So it's just, as soon as you go into that issue or that story, it was just such a heavy place to go at times, and really taxing emotionally, knowing that it was something that affected my family. But also, I wanted to really focus on the fact that there's no way to heal a hurt and that everyone moves through that kind of grief differently. And that I think sometimes people might get stuck in their mind of this is how you should grieve, or this is how you're supposed to deal with something, or this is how you should process it. But that's not right. Everyone's got to do it in their own way. And I wanted the book to kind of open the opportunity for a wider vision of that.
Following on from that, Kaneana, can you maybe explain if you had to do any research or what research that you had to do to bring this story to the page?
Yeah, I did a lot of research, and that was in different forms. So with some of the stories that I won't actually say exactly what the issues are because it comes within the story, but I spoke to friends and I had that had experienced the issues, and I had one of them read the whole draft and offered a lot of insight, which was fantastic. Prior to that, I spent a lot of time in forums reading people's own experiences for different elements within the book. And I found that the forums were really fantastic. They just offered the emotional aspect of things. That's because you can research online and in books about all the different stages of Alzheimer's, for example, but you don't get the personal experience that the forums offer. So that's probably where I did most of my research. Listening to podcasts as well about certain subjects I did as well. Reading other books if I knew that they touched on that subject to see how they dealt with it. Yes, my friend was very, very helpful. And I also talking to mum about the Alzheimer's bit going back. And yes, I think you constantly, when you're writing, researching, I'm constantly Googling things just to see if you can find a little bit more. So I should say that with the Wellness Centre, that actually came when I first started writing it. My youngest child was only going to preschool 1 day a week, and it would have been around an hour round trip to drop her and come home. So I ended up just dropping her and going straight to my local library. And so when I was first getting the ideas, and I kind of had a few ideas of what I wanted to do with the element of grief and the element of wanting 3 women to be working together, or the 3 women to be together, and I was looking through wellness magazines in the library. And so I looked through a lot of different wellness magazines. So then I was jotting down ideas from articles that were within the magazine. And that was where the very first kind of marrying of the idea and the setting came. So thanks to the library and their magazines.
Always got to plug the library, absolutely.
Yeah.
The setting of this book couldn't have been more different than the setting of your first book. The events of this book take place on the mid-north coast somewhere, a bit closer to home for you, right?
Yeah, so it's only about half an hour from where I live, the town of Wingham it's called.
I wanted to ask you how much of your writing is inspired by your surroundings?
Well, I think it heavily at the moment, isn't it? So I wrote the one after working in television, and all the behind the scenes elements that I wanted to incorporate within that book. Now, in the one, I actually did use close local places as well. So one of the characters in the one, her hometown is Gloucester, which is only about an hour away from me. And then another one's hometown is Port Macquarie, which is another hour in a different direction. So I think I'm too scared to write places that I don't know. So which is funny because I did an interview at a library. I had a conversation with Fiona MacArthur, who lives about an hour and a half from me. And she commented that she said she's the opposite. She always might base it on a real place, but gives it a fictional name, which is something that maybe I should have thought from the get-go. But I've also had, on the flip side of that, I've had lots of people comment and say, oh my gosh, they went to the Garden Grub for breakfast, which is a local cafe, and that they went to Bago Maze, which is another place that's not far. So I've had people really enjoying the local elements for people that I know or people that are around this area. But I think after writing obviously my life has kind of really moved on of working in television, and I think the fast paced and the behind the scenes and the sometimes glossy and perhaps catty, I wanted a different pace myself. I was kind of craving that sea change, I guess, or that the rural change, what is it called, escape to the country or something. So I wanted something that was really kind of kind. And so Wingham is a beautiful little town, and it really, I imagine, would be the perfect place for Healing Hands, my wellness centre. They're a little bit alternative. They're open to different people being different and people embracing different changes. They're surrounded by farms. Yeah, it's just a really lovely place. Very sadly, they were really hammered in our local floods that we had not that long ago. And Wing and Brush, that appears in my book, it's not even open at the moment because it was just hit so badly by the storms and the floods. But yes, I definitely think that I have written a setting, in both cases, settings that I know. I've never run a wellness centre myself though, but I often thought it would be a very nice place to work.
Indeed, I think so too. Healing Hands in particular sounds like a wonderful place to work. So, Kaneana, what would you like most for readers to take away from this book?
I just hope that it's a story that people can connect with. And probably one of the biggest things is what I was saying earlier, is that there is no one way to heal a hurt, and that grief is universal and grief is relatable. And I hope that people realise how much this story comes from the heart. I think it's always, I hopefully will go on to write more books, but I think that this story is always going to stay really special in my heart because it was a story that I believed that needed to be told.
What have you learnt about yourself and your writing since we last spoke? And what advice would you give to your unpublished self if you had the chance?
Oh gosh, probably one of the biggest changes I've had between writing the one and all we have is now is that I've moved to Scrivener, which for me I have found quite amazing because in both instances I've written 3 different women. So with the one, I felt like I was scrolling back and forth. I kind of plot and I kind of pant, so I don't feel like that I'm one in particular, but I go back and forth. I often, back from my TV training, I often have an idea for what in my mind I call a spotlight scene. So I know what I want that scene to be, but it might be, 2/3 of the way through the story. So then I write that scene and then I'll write a note for myself of how I need to seed an idea in earlier or seed several ideas in earlier. So Scrivener is a great place where I can just add these new little document sections, kind of like Post-its, to say, you need to add this, you need to add, you need to add ABC in here somewhere. And then the same for the follow through, that I need to pull that thread through essentially and add further scenes. So in Word, I found that really hard. In Scrivener, I love that element. One thing that I've learned with writing the 2 different books, and I'm now trying to finish a third, with the one, I knew the ending really early on. And for All We Have Is Now, I didn't know how it was going to all come together. And even during the edits, that very last page, it took me a long time to get it right, the right tone and the right message, and just, changing, different words and the right emotion, and just, really hitting it like that final, that final feeling. Well, I found that really hard to get. And even the book that I'm working on now, I'm in a similar position where I think, why haven't I figured this ending out? It would be so much better, because I felt like I was really working towards the end in the one. So I've made internal promises when I start another book is to get that ending nailed down, because I find it really hard. I recently heard or read somewhere that Jane Harper starts from the ending and works backwards, and I think that that's so smart and brilliant. And I really want to try that, but I haven't done it yet. Clearly, I haven't. But I'm still. I think my writing process is constantly evolving. Still, I'm still trying to figure it out, and I write myself notes everywhere. Every time I get stuck, I think, I need to read it from the beginning and get back into the flow of it. I think that that's just natural too, with having lots of other things going on in life and the kids, that you think, where am I? You might be so involved with the story at 2:50, and then suddenly you go, oh my gosh, it's school pick up and I've got to go. And you think, I'm gonna finish that when I get home. I'm gonna finish that tonight or tomorrow. And then you sit back down and so much has happened since then that it's really hard to get back into that exact same headspace or, the flow of writing. I feel like I'm still very much learning.
Yeah, I often wonder how people evolve, between book 1 and 2 and 3 and so on, and whether or not, they would change anything or, what they've learned about themselves. But I agree with you, there's so many obstacles and different ways, and it's a constantly evolving process, I think. And I think you've said it perfectly well. But when I interviewed Jane, she told me that
That was yours, was it? Oh, there you go.
Starts from the end. And I have to say that I wish I had taken her advice when I was working on manuscript.
I think she needs to do some courses. I'm like, okay, so for example, I want to know what that last scene is and then how you figure it out. I mean, especially when she's adding twists in there, I'm thinking, yes, I mean, it just sounds so clever because...
Well, it is clever. It's exactly what you need to know, because the reality is, I knew exactly what my story was going to be, but I had no idea how it was going to end. And so I think I spent 3 months deliberating how it was going to end. It's not efficient.
Starting at the end is much more efficient. We should both do it next time, Claudine.
Yes. Okay. Pinky swear, Kaneana.
Pinky swear.
All right, so we know that you're working on something else at the moment. Can you offer us any little tidbits of, information about that book?
This one's about 2 friends, and it's over about 2 decades. So it's another friendship book. I feel like I really enjoyed writing the friendships within All We Have Is Now and seeing how you can kind of bounce off each other. One thing that I found in the one, even though it was about the 3 women, their stories were all quite separate. It was kind of the circumstance that was connecting them, but they didn't have all that many scenes together and they weren't friends essentially. And I think friendship's such an important thing in women's lives, and you get by with the help of your friends. So I think that I wanted to do that as well. But I also wanted to, in both cases, both All We Have Is Now and the current one that I'm working on that doesn't have a title, I want to also show that friendship is quite rocky at times and that it's hard work to be friends, and there are different things that offer stress on relationships. And so that's what I've kind of exploring, but also how a friendship is quite solid over 20 years. A friendship that survived that long is generally a very good one. That's my very long-winded waffly pitch that I clearly need to work on.
Oh, that's wonderful. Not waffly at all. I loved it. Thank you. So, Kaneana, if listeners wanted to find out more about you and your books, where can they do that?
I've got a website which is kaneanamay.com. Kaneana is very hard to spell, which makes life very tricky as an author, but it's Kaneana, and then May is simple, May. I also am on Facebook and Instagram as Kaneana May Writer.
Kaneana, I'm so happy to have had the chance to speak with you about this beautiful book. I wish you every success with it and the others that will no doubt follow. Thank you for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Oh, thanks so much, Claudine.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.